The newest criminal syndicate in the Star Wars universe is the Ashiga clan. It was created for the video game Star Wars Outlaws. The aesthetic of the Ashiga takes a lot of inspiration from Japanese culture, but doesn't seem to follow a hierarchy like the Yakuza. Instead, the syndicate is based entirely around the Melitto species. The Melitto don't possess many of the human senses, but are covered in fine hairs, called cilia. These serve as their unique version of senses. The insect-like Melitto live in hives ruled by queens. The queens delegate societal management needs to myrmitrices, younger females of the species. The myrmitrices delegated out the grunt work to the male working class. They're mermites. Wars would often break out amongst different hives, or when it was deemed necessary to found a new hive. The mermites on the losing side would be cast out of society. Most of these outcast Melitto would venture into the wider galaxy with no leader. They ended up excelling as mercenaries in one form or another. Some of the outcast Melitto formed the Ashiga clan and put preserving their new society above all else. The only true values members of the Ashiga clan and those they had dealings with was in how much they could contribute to the collective. They established roots on the planet Kijimi. Those roots quickly spread throughout every aspect of the Underworld on that planet, dominating it. When the Jedi Order switched from peacekeepers and something of a police force for the entire galaxy into military leaders during the Clone Wars, the Black Sun Criminal Syndicate was born. The Black Sun was composed mostly of Faline, a humanoid reptilian mammal species with a large presence on Mustafar. They were relatively successful as a criminal enterprise and able to strong-arm many in the galaxy. They didn't have wider ambitions for galactic control or changing the entire flow of the governments of the galaxy. At their height, they were affiliated with the Shadow Collective under Maul's rule. Despite not having ambitions to control the politics of the galaxy, they had run-ins with Vader and ex-Jedi Padawan Ahsoka Tano, going under the assumed name of Ashla. While they were powerful criminals in their own right, run-ins with the larger governments and orders of the galaxy have them looking more like a big fish in a small pond that would get into trouble when they tried to overreach their grasp. After the Shadow Collective was disbanded, they had another heightened power, which is around the time of the establishment of the New Republic. They were seen as one of the major 5 crime syndicates in the galaxy. This is also when they were able to go beyond crime alone and began to influence the larger galaxy. They used their ill-gotten wealth to bribe 5 New Republic senators into turning their backs on Mon Mothma, who was trying to establish a strong government, prolonging the Galactic Civil War. This plot was ultimately foiled by Han Solo in Sinjar Wrath Velis. Crimson Dawn is a very large criminal syndicate that has had some interesting rulers throughout its history. Before they were a criminal organization with at least something resembling order, they were a brutal band of marauders. Just to give you one particularly brutal example of their barbarism, they were raiding the Savarian people, and these people stood up to them. As a punishment for their defiance, the early members of Crimson Dawn cut the tongues out of the mouths of every single man, woman, and child. As the raiding band grew, it became more like the organization we'd see on the big and small screens. Early in their restructuring, they formed an uneasy alliance with the Pike Syndicate. Around this time, they were also considered one of the 5 crime syndicates that ran the galaxy's underworld in the early days of the Galactic Empire. To elevate the clan on a galactic scale even further, in 19 BBY, the fallen Sith Lord Darth Maul, then just Maul, recruited Crimson Dawn into the Shadow Collective. Maul gathered numerous criminal organizations under his umbrella and wielded them for more than profits. He used them as a private military. Crimson Dawn was part of the Siege of Mandalore, which was a major political upheaval of the galaxy in the final days of the Galactic Republic and the start of the Galactic Empire. The official leader of Crimson Dawn at this time was Dryden Voss. Voss was a near-human who took power of the Syndicate from his predecessor. Since he was under Maul's thumb, he was something of a figurehead, though he was still intimidating in the right circles, and had vast wealth. Unironically in these things, Voss was turned on by his own lieutenant, who killed him in a duel and pinned it on a gun for hire. Qi'ra, childhood friend of Han Solo, reported to Maul and took over Crimson Dawn. Qi'ra and Dawn continued to operate under Maul's rule. When Maul was killed once and for all, Crimson Dawn faded from notice. Many in the Underworld assumed the organization had simply folded without Maul keeping everything together. Qi'ra spent her life learning the ins and outs of how Crimson Dawn ran when she was working under Voss. She bided her time. She kept it running in the shadows. Qi'ra's vision for the organization wasn't just to be a criminal enterprise. She wanted to go to war with the Sith and take down Palpatine and Vader themselves. There is a ton of history on Crimson Dawn, and it would make this transmission that's supposed to be about the 5 major crime syndicates very lopsided. There will be a follow-up transmission on the entire history of Crimson Dawn, so stay tuned for that. A collection of crime families, organizations, individuals, and even rogue droids formed the Crymorah Syndicate. During the reign of the Galactic Empire, this collection was one of the top 5 crime syndicates in the galaxy at its height. Jabba the Hutt even made inroads with the Crymorah, which increased the power he held as a gangster and also got him on the Grand Hutt Council. More on that in a minute. An organization of powerful crime lords in its own right. The Rang clan, or Rangs, started their criminal enterprise during the Clone Wars. They had a massive rivalry with the much more powerful Crimson Dawn. Joining the Crymorah allowed the Rangs to continue operating as the Alliance granted them strength. The Rangs were actually created for the infamous game Star Wars 1313, a project that was in development for a very long time and was highly anticipated before it was cancelled. The Wandering Star Gang had been around for a long time as well. They were even mentioned in the days of the High Republic. Despite the long timeline, very little is known about the organization. It seems to operate as something as a paramilitary hierarchy. The leader boasted the unique title of Grand Vigoth. Not sure what that means. Their main base of operations was on Coruscant, level 1313 to be exact. Yes, this is the level of Coruscant that shares the name with the game we just mentioned, but they were actually not part of that game's development. The Wandering Star was first introduced in 2018's Last Shot, written by Daniel Jose Older. They also had bases on Utapau and operated in the casinos of Canto Bight. The rogue droids are possibly the most intriguing member of this collective, as they are programmed machines with only simulated free will. The droid Gotra was formed by a group of repurposed battle droids with altered or corrupted programming. These battle droids began pushing for droid rights. They saw the rise of the Empire and abandonment of the separatist droid army as a great injustice to their kind, and many in the galaxy kinda saw their point of view. They started in the industrial sector of Coruscant, but expanded into the wider galaxy as their numbers continued to grow. Their founding purpose was droid rights, but they ended up becoming muscle for the Crymorah, and took shots against the Empire that had wronged them whenever they could. Crime seemed a means to an end for the droid group rather than their main purpose. They remained a functional organization well into the reign of the New Republic. The Baldemiro family was a member of the Crymorah as well. Aside from their name, there are no details at the time of this writing. They were given a name in the Dawn of Rebellion visual guide that was released in 2023. The Hutts are known throughout the entire galaxy as ruthless gangsters. The Hutt clans, cartel, or families are interchangeable names for the same criminal organization. Not every member of the Hutt species was a criminal, but there was such a staggering amount of them that were that the wider galaxy saw them only in this light. The Hutt cartel made their fortunes primarily in smuggling goods, supplies, drugs, and slaves. Nothing was off limit to the Hutts. The Grand Hutt Council was in charge of the criminal organization to show how powerful they actually were. The Hutt Grand Council also controlled the entire planet of Nal Hutta, which was the Hutt species' home world. The Hutts had been gangsters as long as there had been a Galactic Republic. During the times of peace and democratic expansion in the High Republic, the citizens of the galaxy largely saw this as a good thing. Obviously. The Hutts, however, saw it as a looming threat to their way of doing things. Even at this time, Hundreds of years before we'd meet Jabba the Hutt, they were powerful enough to try to interfere with the Republic's spread. They remained separate from the Republic, so they had to deal with the big threats of the era, the Nihil and the Drengir, on their own. They did pretty well because by the time of the Clone Wars, the Hutts were some of the most powerful gangsters in the known galaxy. It wasn't until the reign of the Galactic Empire that the Hutts joined the Five Crime Syndicates. They were likely large enough to withstand the Empire's rule all on their own, and even made backdoor deals with Imperial officials at times, but I doubt you can run a criminal organization for so many generations without being overly cautious and knowing which way the wind's blowing. When Jedi Master Luke Skywalker and his allies infiltrated Jabba's palace and Leia Organa killed Jabba the Hutt, the organization began to decline. Many of their allies and enforcers left the Hutts for more promising prospects. This only furthered their decline in influence. The Hutt Cartel is another organization that there will be a full history follow-up transmission on. There's just too much to cram into this one. The Syndicate of Pikes was based on the Pike homeworld of Obadiah. They led the Spice Cartel, a massive drug-running operation, the biggest drug-running operation. They also had a large hand in Death Watch's rise to power on Mandalore, so they could use the confusion to further their own wealth and strength. This syndicate and the Spice Cartel were in charge of virtually all spice production and distribution in the galaxy. They would hire the transportation of the drugs to smugglers and freighter captains to absolve themselves of the day-to-day tasks of the drug trade, but they always kept a hand in all aspects of the operation. Most of the spice came from Kessel. Kessel was also a source for coaxium, an expensive starship fuel. The Pike Syndicate started dealing in raw coaxium as well. The Pikes only looked out for themselves. They joined Maul's Shadow Council, but when it came time to help with the Collective, which could cut into their profits, they jumped ship. They were eventually allowed back into the organization, I don't know why, but Maul did make it very clear that they were on thin ice. The Zerek Besh criminal syndicate grew quickly during the Galactic Civil War. This is no surprise when you realize that the Zerek Besh was actually an undercover arm of the Imperial Security Bureau meant to infiltrate the other criminal organizations and gather intel. In 3 ABY, Directo Sliro Barsha got permission from his commanding officers to establish Zerek Besh. He ran the criminal enterprise as his own personal criminal organization, and he seemed to take great joy in his work. The power, wealth, and influence of criminal life never went to his head, however. He remained fiercely loyal to the Empire, and he used his criminal connections to hunt the Rebel Alliance. When the Hutt clan attacked Vader's flagship, Zerek Besh joined the Syndicate War and had many of the crime syndicates fighting each other. This was a brilliant move in service to the Empire. The enemies of the Empire's order were at each other's throats, weakening each other while the Empire continued to grow stronger. Personal ambitions, however, would eventually hurt Zerek Besh. Barsha's own brother, Jalen Vrax, convinced Vader to let him, Vrax, lead the Syndicate. He offered crucial information about the Rebel Alliance to Vader in exchange for this promotion, if you want to call it that. Vader agreed, and Vrax killed his own brother. Vrax wasn't in charge for very long before he himself was also killed. The future of Zerek Besh seemed unstable, but the Syndicate ultimately survived. Eventually, Palpatine instructed the Syndicate to stop the Syndicate War and rallied all the other smaller syndicates against Crimson Dawn and Qi'ra specifically. She did have aspirations on taking Palpatine down. They didn't do this out of any loyalty to the Empire, but because Palpatine promised favor to the Syndicate that did his bidding best. This primer is far from an exhaustive list of all criminal groups in the Star Wars galaxy, nor is it an exhaustive history of each one mentioned. I wanted to cover some of the most prominent criminal organizations. I started writing this transmission way back before Star Wars Outlaws was released. I had abandoned it after the lackluster reception to the game. At the time of this recording, I still have yet to touch the game. Whether you like it or not is really irrelevant. This is a fascinating aspect of the Star Wars galaxy that has been in play since the beginning of the Star Wars original trilogy. Jabba the Hutt, after all. Check out this transmission next for more lore from the Star Wars galaxy.